Today's session for Fundamentals of Management, we are going to talk about the communication and its process. So as we know that communication nowadays has become indispensable activity in all organizations, and no organization can think of its existence without effective communication. We can say that communication is a managerial activity which is essential for effective leading and motivation of people at workplace. A manager who is in a position to communicate well will be able to get the cooperation of his subordinates towards the fulfillment of the objective of the organization. Besides studying the nature and importance of communication in an industrial organization, we shall also study the overall barriers of effective communication, and also we should study the various ways how we can overcome those barriers in the later classes. So, coming to the meaning of communication, we can say that the word communication is derived from the Latin word communis, which means common. If a person affects a communication, he has established a common ground of understanding. Thus, communication involves imparting a common idea and covers all types of behavior resulting therefore from. This indicates that various factors enter into the process of communication. These are the communicators or source of information, the receptors or the receiver of information, the content of the communication, and the manner of communication. Thus, communication in its broad sense means both the art of communicating something and the manner through which communication flows to the receiver, such as with the help of letters, notices, emails, SMSs, voicemails, and so on. We also look at communication. It many a times means that it is a. We can also say that in general terminology that communication refers to the reciprocal exchange of information, ideas, facts, opinion, beliefs, feelings, attitudes through verbal and non-verbal means between two or more people within a group or set of people. Thus today, communication has become the lifeblood of any organization. The success of a manager depends to a great extent on his ability to communicate. Therefore, if we see that various authors have given their own set of definition, like if I quote in the words of Ellen, communication is the sum of all the things one person does when he wants to create understanding in the mind of another. It is a bridge of meaning. It involves a systematic and a continuous process of telling, listening, and understanding. Various other authors have given their definition, which is cited on the slide. Thus, in a nutshell, we can say that communication is a process of passing information and understanding from one person to another, and it is the process of imparting ideas and making oneself understood by others. Moving to the next slide, we'll be discussing about the various characteristics and features of communication. Though communication is an attempt to share understanding by two or more persons, it is a two-way process, and it is completed when there is some response from one receiver of the information. From this, we can sum up the nature of communication as follows. Number one, it involves at least two persons. Communication involves at least two persons, which is one, the sender of the message, and the second, who is the receiver of the message. Communication is a two-way traffic. The process of communication is not completed until the message has been understood by the receiver. Understanding is an essential part of communication, but it does not imply agreement. The next is it creates understanding. The basic purpose of communication is to create an understanding in the minds of the receiver of the information. Next, we have communication may take several forms, that is, order, instructions, reports, suggestions, grievances, observations, and so on. The message may be conveyed through spoken words, written, or through gestures. Following the next feature, we can say that communication is a communication is coming to the next feature, we can say that communication is a pervasive function. Communication takes place at all the levels in the organization. It is in fact the artery of any organization through which instructions, order, decisions of the management flows from top to bottom, or the feedback flows from bottom to top. It also conducts upward the pulse of the workforce in the ways like feedback, ideas, feelings, suggestions, and so on. Thus, it is essential at all the levels of management and in all the businesses at large. Next feature of communication is it is a continuous activity. Everything a manager does involves communication. Communicating not communicate is not something but everything. A manager must always be in touch with his subordinates, peers, and superiors in order to get things done. It is an activity to which every manager devotes an overwhelming portion of his time. The next feature is verbal and non-verbal. Communication can happen in terms of written or oral communication, or it can happen in forms of gestures. Non-verbal communication is also a vital part which assists the verbal communication and makes it more effective. Goal-oriented. Communication leads to the fulfillment of organizational goals. If the manager properly communicates with his subordinates, peers, and seniors in an appropriate manner and in through the right channel, the communication process leads to the fulfillment of the organizational goal, and thus communication is a goal-oriented process. So this was all about the features of communication. Moving to the process of communication. The process of communication includes various elements, and a simple model of communication is illustrated in the slide thereof. We can see that the first element is sender, which takes the process of encoding, and which the first element of communication process is a sender, which follows the process of encoding, and there's a message which he wants to send it to the receiver, and when the receiver receives the message, he decodes the same and gives a feedback. And this happens in an entire environment, and this entire process takes place in the environment of an organizational setting. So let's discuss one by one the various elements of the communication process. The first is the referent. A referent is one who motivates the sender to share information. That can be a message, object, sound, time schedule, idea, perception, emotions, and so on, that ignite the communication process. The second is a sender. A sender is a person who encodes the message. He is the person who actually initiates the communication process, and he is also known as the source or the communicator. The sender has some vital information which he wants to communicate to the other person to achieve some purpose. But the initiating the message, the sender attempts to achieve an understanding and a change in the behavior of the receiver. Next, we have encoding or the communication symbol. The sender of the information organizes his ideas into a series of symbols, for example, in the form of words, signs, etc., which he feels will communicate to the intended receiver or the receivers. This is known as the encoding of message, that is, converting the ideas into communicable codes which is understood by the receiver of the message. The next element to the communication process is the communication channel. After encoding the message, the sender chooses the mode of transmission. For example, after encoding the message, the sender chooses the mode of communication, such as air for spoken words or paper for letters. The mode of transmission is often inseparable from the message. The channel is the link that connects the sender and the receiver. Ear, sight, and sound are some of the important communication channels. The receiver must consider while selecting a channel. Some people respond better to formal letters or communication, others to the informal spoken words. The channel of the communication which are officially recognized by the organization are known as formal channels. The next element is the process of decoding. Decoding is the process by which the receiver draws the meaning from the symbol encoded by the sender. It is affected by the receiver's part through experience, education, perceptions, expectations, and mutuality of meaning with the sender. The next element is of the receiver. Receiver is the person who receives the message. The communication process is incomplete without the existence of receiver of the message. It is the receiver who receives and tries to understand the message. If the message does not reach the receiver, communication cannot be said to have taken place. The last element to the communication process is of feedback. After receiving the message, the receiver will take necessary action and send back information to the communicator. Feedback is a reversal of the communication process in which a reaction to the sender's message is expressed. The receiver becomes the sender and feedback goes from the same steps as the original communication. It may be noted that generally, greater the feedback, the more effective the communication process is likely to be. For instance, early feedback would enable the manager or the sender to know if his subordinates have been properly understood the message that has been carried out.